In chapter 3 of Getting to Yes, we are talking about interests. And after we set up this idea of principal bargaining, and then thought about how we separate the people from the problem, we can move on to the next step, which is related, where we are thinking about the interests here, right? And again, the book starts with one general idea here, and that is that when we are negotiating, we should try to focus on the interests and not on the positions. If you think about it, in any problem that you try to negotiate over, there is your position, right? If it's a money transaction, if you're trying to buy a house, you say, I don't want to pay more than $150,000, right? That's your position. The seller might say, I'm not accepting less than $160,000. That's their position. But the question is, what is your interest and what is the interest of the other side? Your interest is probably to find a house in a certain location with some specific features. And that's the house that you want. And you want the house because you want the safety and security of building a home. And the seller might have interest like paying back an outstanding mortgage or moving into a more expensive market. Okay, that is their interest. Now we verbalize our positions, but so many times we get to a point that we are debating or arguing over the position. Right? I would say one number and they would say another number, and we are just arguing the position and we're not focusing on the interests. Focusing on the interests and not the positions might help us get over our differences and find a solution that would work here. And so the first question before we enter negotiations, something that we need to ask ourselves, and even do that as a thought exercise or even take a piece of paper and write it down, is what is the interest that is underlying my position? When I say this amount of money, $150,000, what is underneath it? What do I want to get out of this transaction at the end of the day? And so clarifying that to yourself is very, very important. Now we also have to do that to the other side. And one way to do that is to look at their proposal, which is their position, $160,000, and ask the question, why? Why did they went with that specific position? Now there are two ways to do that. One way is that you can openly address the other side and ask them the why question. Can you explain to me why you are not willing to go under $160,000? That's one way. But obviously you can get to that point if you already have some level of trust and you are talking to the other side. It also is nice to show them that you are interested in their interests and not just in their position. That you are trying to understand where they're coming from. So going back to the points that we talked about, recognizing that there are people, we're also recognizing that there are people with their own interests. And so that is a good step. But we can also go back to our piece of paper and try to make a list by standing in their own shoes, try to understand what are their pros and cons if they accept your offer or if they reject your offer. So try to understand the other side, not just as a human being, but also what are the interests of the other side. And then also recognize that both you and the other side have a list of interests. And those interests, some of them might be the same. If we look at, again, at any money transaction, a car sale or a house sale, at the end of the day, you both have an interest in completing this transaction, right? And so recognize that some of those interests are the same, and some of those interests are different, but not competing with each other, and some of those interests might be competing with each other. But making those lists and trying to understand your own interest and the interest of the other side will make us better understand what is the problem and what are the sticking points. Because the sticking points, more often than not, are not just the competing positions. Those are just how we externalize the sticking points. Also, recognizing different interests or the different number of interests for the other side and yourself might help you find a compromise that might address or give in on some of those, but also maintain your own interest on others. And so you might be able to come up with an idea or an option that balances the interests of both sides. Now, it is good to not hold back and not be secret, but talk about your interests. Say that you need a reliable car that will drive for another 10 years, right? Say that you understand also that the seller has to pay back a loan that they took on that car, right? So acknowledge, be open as much as possible about your interests and the interests of the other side. By talking about the interest of the other side, you are both showing understanding and, making those about people relations more than just a robotic transaction. But also you may elicit more information this way, because when you're telling the other side that you understand their interest and you verbalize it, they may find that you left something out and jump in to fill it in, which again gives you more information to come up with different ideas. And then it is important to identify the problem before we try to find the solution, right? Because if we're not talking about the same thing, if we don't identify the same problem, we are less likely to agree on any given solution. And so first of all, by acknowledging each other's interests and saying, and here is the problem, or here is the difference we need to find a bridge over, then we can find those solutions that address the problem. But when we're doing that, we have to make sure that we are not overly focusing on looking back and trying to see how we got to this point, or again, trying to assign blame on one side or the other of why this happened. But instead, we should be looking forward to, okay, let's find what is the sticking point, what is the problem right now, and then move on to possible solutions. All in all, what we really need to be doing is to be hard on the problem and soft on the people. And that is kind of the summary sentence for chapters 2 and 3 that talk about the people and the interests.